Right, so there are attacks and verbal takedowns of Israel and Zionism and the attacks they have committed, and then there are those that are in a whole class of their own. And where I certainly don't fit into the latter, someone who has shown that they do time after time has been the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese. And for someone who has been attacked by Israel and their acolytes and their mouthpieces in the way she has, you know she's hitting the mark, therefore. And she's done so again in a scathing attack in relation to the number of child fatalities in Gaza, describing Israel as a mafia who are responsible for the deaths of 40 children every single day. Her intervention here is especially timely, given many of those fatalities right now are as a result of the cold, as a result of the lack of shelter, food and fuel that Israel has denied into Gaza in flagrant violation of the Gaza ceasefire, that they get a free pass over, as usual. But also, as usual, her remarks have caused both outrage and also garnered support, but only amongst those who will have actually heard about this, because as ever when it comes to critique of Israel, it goes grossly unreported, even when it comes to kids dying, it seems. So let's start this conversation. Right, so UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese has triggered the sensitive souls in Israel, having them crying victim, as she points out the real victims too often, and in horrifying numbers, are children. Whatever your position on the genocide in Gaza might be, kids are innocents. This should be an inarguable point. But if you're arguing the opposite, then you're frankly insane, and frankly you stand a good chance of, well, election to the Israeli Knesset, given so many of them opine in that fashion and are of the same opinion, and I'll come on to one such example presently. But Albanese has delivered a scathing critique of Israel's conduct in Gaza, describing the state as a mafia responsible for the deaths of 40 children daily. She has highlighted the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which has led to this horrifying statistic, where children are dying not only from the bombs and bullets raining down on them outside of the current ceasefire, but also, and more relevantly right now, from the cold, hunger and preventable diseases. This is all, as regular viewers of this channel will know, due to Israel's continued blockade of essential supplies, including the shelter, fuel and food that was promised, despite these being conditions of the current Gaza ceasefire. But the rules never seem to apply to Israel, do they? Now, Albanese has long been a vocal critic of Israeli policy in Gaza and the West Bank. Her recent comments do, however, mark a significant escalation in both tone and urgency. Her intervention this time is centred around the decision by the BBC to remove from their streaming service the Gaza documentary Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, which has been told from the perspective of children, but withdrawn after complaints by the lowest form of bottom-feeding Zionists that the main child narrator was the son of a Gaza minister, even though the minister was responsible for agriculture under the Hamas political administration, that the political and militant wings of Hamas are separate, and that Hamas are the administration in Gaza, and of course the simple fact that a child has no impact on the political leanings of their parents. But these are facts, of course, and who wants them when you've a narrative to concoct in justifying the depravity Israel carry out? In response to this, Albanese put out a tweet reading, "The intimidation, smears, blackmailing and full range of vindictive tactics employed by pro-Israel groups resemble those of a mafia. The only way to stop them is to not fear them, not be silenced by them, and instead to speak louder and louder." Damn right too, although you might think, well, that's easy for you, Damo, you're not exactly quite at the best of times. But the fact is, these people are snakes and cowards, believing that Israel has the right to do what it is doing, even when that has been the deaths of thousands and thousands of children. Albanese has also accused Israel of systematically killing 40 children daily in another tweet, which reads, "Since I became UN Special Rapporteur, hardly a day passed without Israel's killing of at least one Palestinian child. A decades-long tradition that escalated into genocidal acts after October 23. Since then, Israel has killed nearly 40 Palestinian children a day. The silence of the corporate media and political leaders is every day more deafening and racist." And she's right again, she's nailed it. A justifiably blunt response there to those who choose to stay silent, those who choose to look away, who should absolutely be reflecting upon themselves for that, but they won't. So, what good are they? What is the point of them? All they are doing is aiding and abetting in this perpetual cycle of violence and impunity. Albanese argued that the lack of political and media coverage of these atrocities is rooted in racism, as the world turns a blind eye to the suffering of Palestinian children. Albanese's use of the term mafia is particularly striking because it evokes those images of a ruthless and unaccountable entity that operates outside of the bounds of law and morality. And that pretty much sums Israel up quite nicely, doesn't it? Israel's blockade of Gaza, now in its 18th year, has created what human rights organisations describe as an open-air prison or concentration camp. The recent escalation of violence has only exacerbated this crisis, with Israel's military actions disproportionately affecting civilians. 70% of those killed in Gaza have been women and children, as they tried, and have completely failed at, to eliminate Hamas. Over 12,000 children have been killed in Gaza since October 2023, with thousands more injured or orphaned. And one of the most harrowing aspects of the current crisis is the number of children dying from preventable causes now. At least 6 Palestinian babies have frozen to death in Gaza within a 12-hour period this month, as Israel blocked the entry of those tents, the shelters and the fuel. These deaths are a direct result of Israel's ongoing blockade, of their breaching the ceasefire, which has left Gaza's population without adequate shelter, heating or medical care during one of the coldest winters on record. The blockade violates the terms of the current ceasefire as well. But who's going to hold Israel to account when overseers like the US are, well, basically on their side? The current Phase 1 agreement explicitly requires Israel to allow in the entry of humanitarian aid, the shelter, the fuel and the food. Yet, as Albanese and other observers have noted, Israel continues to obstruct these supplies, closing crossings letting them in like Kerem Shalom and making an already dire situation even worse, but by design. It is all intentional. Hospitals in Gaza, already overwhelmed by the influx of war casualties, are struggling to cope with the surge in preventable illnesses now, including respiratory infections and malnutrition. According to the World Health Organization, over 80% of Gaza's medical facilities are non-operational, leaving thousands of children without access to life-saving care. And aside from Albanese, the director of field hospitals in Gaza, Dr. Marwan Al-Hams, has also made the state of the situation where it comes to healthcare abundantly clear, having said, "The number of children who died due to the severe cold has risen to 6. The Gaza Strip needs a new health system, and most hospitals are destroyed and cannot provide the necessary treatment to the people. The hospitals in the northern Gaza Strip are not enough to provide services to citizens after they return to their places of residence. We need generators urgently and oxygen stations to operate intensive care units. We have a long list of patients who need treatment outside the Strip, and the number that has been transferred to Egypt does not exceed 1% to date. Some medical teams have entered the Strip, but the period during which the specialists remain and their number is insufficient." And still, there is no pressure on Israel to shift its stance when politicians and the mainstream media are ignoring this, and ignoring those like Francesca Albanese speaking out against this. While Albanese's comments have drawn attention to the plight of Gaza's children, the rhetoric of some Israeli officials underscores the dehumanization of all Palestinians that underpins this crisis, and Israel's racist justification for all that it is doing. And one who has made particularly inflammatory remarks this week has been Nissim Vaturi, a member of the Knesset. An excerpt from the Cradle summing up his thoughts and the thoughts of those in power in Israel and, well, those he represents. Hebrew radio station Kol Rama quoted Israeli Knesset Deputy Speaker Nissim Vaturi as saying that all male Palestinian adults in the Gaza Strip need to be eliminated, adding that Israel is dealing with Gaza's residents in a way that is too tolerant, and that the residents of Gaza are not welcome anywhere, and everyone is pushing them toward Israel. They, the Palestinians in Gaza, are outcasts and no one in the world wants them. Children and women must be separated and adults must be eliminated. These remarks follow a pattern of similar genocidal statements made by multiple Israeli officials. Israeli Knesset member Nissim Vaturi told Israel's Kol Rama radio that all adults in Gaza are not innocent and should be killed on Sunday. This follows his previous remarks in November, where he called for Gaza to be burned now, expressing that Israel had been too humane in its approach. In January, a group of Israeli lawmakers stirred outrage with a call for the military to escalate its already devastating campaign in Gaza. 8 members of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee demanded that Defense Minister Israel Katz order the destruction of all water, food and power supplies in northern Gaza, a move which would result in the starvation of thousands of Palestinians. Their proposals include treating any man, woman and child remaining in the area without a white flag as a legitimate target to be killed. Vaturi's comments are part of a broader pattern of dehumanization that has characterized Israel's approach to the Palestinian people. separating women and children, killing all the adults. Israel regularly balks at being compared to Nazism, but with comments like this, those parallels are going to keep getting drawn. This rhetoric is echoed by senior officials and has been used to justify policies of collective punishment, including the blockade of Gaza and the demolition of Palestinian homes. As Albanese has pointed out, this dehumanization is a key factor in the international community's failure to hold Israel account for its actions. Albanese's criticism of Israel need to be taken in the context of the long history of impunity Israel has displayed. Despite numerous UN resolutions condemning Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank, the international community has failed to take meaningful action to hold Israel accountable. This failure is due in part to the political and economic influence that Israel has amongst its allies, particularly in the West, especially in the United States, which has consistently vetoed UN Security Council resolutions critical of Israel, shielding it from all accountability. But the lack of accountability has emboldened Israel to continue with its policies of occupation, to carry on blockading, and carry on with its military aggression, to keep on carrying out its genocide. As Albanese has noted, this impunity is rooted in racism, as is the suffering of Palestinian children, as they are seen as less worthy of attention and action than the suffering of children in other parts of the world. So her statement on racism doesn't just apply to Israel, but to everyone who supports them as well. Backing Israel in what they are doing is a racist endeavour. And as she also said, we shouldn't fear them calling us by similar terms, their weaponization of the term anti-Semitism, because it has no credibility, given what they are doing. This double standard is not only unjust, but it also undermines the credibility of international institutions and the principles of human rights and equality if they get away with cowing people into silence with fears of being called racist themselves. It is not racist to say stop killing kids, stop committing genocide. All have a moral and legal obligation to demand our governments and other organisations protect the rights of Palestinian children and hold Israel accountable for its actions. This includes enforcing the terms of the Gaza ceasefire and calling Israel out each and every time they break it. It means ensuring the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid and supporting efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace, and yes, calling Israel out for not attending talks in light of that as well. Francesca Albanese's condemnation of Israel as a mafia responsible for the deaths of 40 children daily should shock all of us, because I think a lot of us need a good shocking. It should incense all of us of the moral and humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the international community's failure to act to stop it. This is not only a betrayal of the principles of human rights and justice, but also a failure of basic humanity. It comes right down to who we are, who we choose to be. Where Israel may view these people as inhuman or as animals, we are better than that. We see them as more of that than that. We know they are human beings with dreams and with hopes and the right to a future free from violence and fear. And if your leaders won't fight for that, we need new ones who will. For more on that story, the BBC film that has been pulled and the BBC's pathetic excuses for doing so, do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to the channel as well, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.